Life Beats with Sally Musa. Only on Pulse 95.
Assalamu alaikum, hello Allah, and welcome to Life Beats with me, Sally Musa. We are about to step into the dark world of crime fiction writing with best-selling author Jessica Jarlvi. Her amazing story, from mum to award-winning author, is proof that anything is possible. If you've ever thought, well, I might have a book in me, well, this might just be the show for you. You can get in touch with us here with your questions for Jessica. Share your experiences as well of how maybe you want to write a book. Maybe you've written something and you're wondering how to get it published. She could be your woman. 4215 on the text lines, or you can get in touch on Instagram. We are at Pulse 95 Radio. Keep it here on Life Beats on Pulse 95.
Life Beats with Sally Musa. Only on Pulse 95.
Author of psychological thrillers When I Wake Up and What Did I Do, Jessica Jarlvi was born and grew up in a small Swedish town prior to her international career, living and working in the UK, the US, and the UAE. Jessica's always had a love for the written word, and after years of writing, she got her big break when she submitted her manuscript to the prestigious Monte Grappa First Fiction competition. After being named one of the winners, she went on to sign a book deal with Aria and Head of Zeus. Welcome to Life Beats, Jessica.
Thank you so much for having me.
So good to have you. Now, tell us about becoming a published best-selling author. It's not just that you're published, that's one thing, but to actually sell books, you know, that's amazing. Was this always your dream to become a published author?
Absolutely. I think when I was little, I was constantly reading, and you get to a point where you would like to create something yourself. So yes, I would always write little stories, you know, they were quite dark and, you know, deep at the time. And as I grew older, I think you get sidetracked by life. You know, you have to make a living, and you don't necessarily choose being an author to live off that. So I also worked as a journalist, as an editor. I worked in marketing and PR. I was teaching at university, but I was always writing. I think if you're writing, you feel really agitated when you don't write. So I was always writing, and I was pitching and wishing that somebody would believe in my story. And every rejection, actually, I try to think of as, wow, somebody actually took the time to read my work. That's really good, you know? And that kind of kept me going.
That is so interesting, because this is what writing is known for, the rejections.
I know. And it can be really hard. That first rejection is really hard. But I tell you, when I sent my first book out, I didn't really expect anybody to pick it up. But one publisher, she wrote a really long letter to me. It was in those days when you still wrote letters. So like, I don't know, 15 years ago. And she was really encouraging and told me the things that she really liked about my writing and what didn't work. And I was so encouraged by this that it kind of kept me going. And I'm still in touch with this publisher. She read my second book and she loved it. She said, don't change it, but I don't know how to sell it. So that was obviously a bit frustrating, that you also have to suddenly start thinking of it as being commercial. But that's what I've had to learn, that publishing is a business, and nobody's going to publish it just because, you know, you're nice and your writing is nice, but because they want to sell books.
You are, of course, from Sweden.
Yes.
And Sweden is part of, you know, that whole genre of Scandi crime fiction.
Yes.
Did you kind of grow up reading that? Was that an inspiration for you? Where does that inspiration come from for crime fiction?
Yes, that's interesting, because I haven't really grown up reading that. I mean, I've read like all genres really, and I still read everything that I come across. But I think it's more that you live in that atmosphere, in that environment. It is very dark, especially in winter. From 3 o'clock in the afternoon, it's dark outside. And it is cold, and you're inside, and you're kind of cooped up, and you got to find a way to entertain yourself. So you read dark stories, but you also, I think, when you create stories, they tend to be in that environment, because that's how I grew up.
Yeah. What is it that you love so much about crime fiction? We have to say, you're a mum of 4.
That's correct.
Right?
Yeah.
So apart from somebody who's had an international career, in PR, and you're also a mum. So
Yes.
your eldest is now 15.
Correct.
Your youngest is just 11 months old.
Yes.
So sweet.
I
So
know.
amazing. That's an incredible journey in and of itself.
It is.
So how do you go from that to crime fiction, or do they just complement each other really?
Maybe they do, actually. I think so. The funny thing is, I'm such a positive person. My kids think I'm annoyingly positive. And so people always assume that I write romance or chick lit. And when they find out that I write these dark stories, I think they're quite surprised. But I think every person, you have all these different aspects to yourself. And I guess that the stuff that's deep and dark inside of me that wants to deal with certain issues, I deal with that in my books. I guess that's, they complement each other, I think.
Because we all need an outlet, don't we?
Absolutely, yes.
We all have that thing inside us that kind of wants to explore those kind of concepts and taboos of crime fiction.
Yes.
That are just, deliciously kind of intriguing. Obviously, you don't want to do it in real life, so you do it through books.
Exactly. And I think that, that I'd like to think that we're all really good people deep down. So I think that we are fascinated by darkness. I think that's why these types of books are popular.
And so for you growing up, you said you read a lot. What did you love to read growing up?
Well, people ask me that all the time, and it's very difficult because, you have people who love, Agatha Christie. But I would probably read Agatha Christie, but I would then also read, Famous Five or, Swedish authors like Astrid Lindgren, really anything. I would really literally go in and just pick off a book off a shelf. And
it was a big thing
and
for
just
you.
read it. Yeah, I would just really wanted to try and read as widely as possible.
And now, how many rejections did you get?
Oh gosh, I stopped counting. I've heard of people who kind of put them up as wallpaper in their bathroom, but no, that's never really inspired me.
But it just kept you going because you're thinking, I'm going to get it. I'm going to perfect it. And you just kept working and working on it.
Yes, a friend of mine once said to me that every no that you get, you're one step closer to a yes. And I think he was so right in saying that. But also, once I started working in my writing, obviously my rejections got a bit nicer, that people would actually not just say thank you, but no thank you, but they would perhaps say, that I do like this, but it's not quite for us because, and things like that really inspires you and encourages you to keep going as well.
So for you, that was the big turning point. The writing competition, entering a writing competition, putting your book forward, and just...
that was a deal breaker.
Tell us about that. What was the process like? And were you just completely nervous and thinking, I'm not going to get anywhere? Or did you think, I can win this?
Actually, I did visualize being up on that stage many times because at that point, I had written 3 books in Swedish. And some of them had been really close to getting a deal, but just didn't go all the way. And my husband said to me, why don't you write in English? Because I want to be able to read what you write. He doesn't speak Swedish. So I thought, why don't I do that? I've been living and working abroad most of my life and always working in English. So I started writing this book and then the competition came up. I submitted, but I did work on that submission a lot. I didn't just kind of put it together and send it off. I did rewrite those first chapters many times. I started the story from different angles. And to see what would actually have the greatest impact. Because when you, especially in a competition or even with a publisher or an agent, you need that first page to count. You need to immediately pull the reader in and they need to feel like, I want to keep reading.
I want to ask you when we come back about those first few lines.
Yes.
Because exactly, it's those first few lines that will keep your reader in there, grab them and just take them to the rest of the book. Or... it may end up losing interest. And I want to ask you what your first lines are. This is from your debut thriller, When I Wake Up. We're talking to Jessica Jarlvi all about her amazing publishing career. That's next.
Life Beats. Life Beats with Sally Musa. Only on Pulse 95.
You're chatting to somebody who is a great author when you forget to come back on the air, and there are so many great stories. Jessica Jarlvi is with us here in the studio, best-selling author, and her first book is When I Wake Up. And I asked you, Jessica, if you can give us the first few lines.
All right. I'll give you the very first line, which I had when I submitted to the competition as well. Teacher of the Year brutally attacked in school parking lot. So I feel like I trying here in the first sentence to basically raise the question is obviously, what happened to this person, and the fact that she's Teacher of the Year, she's obviously a good teacher.
Exactly.
And the fact that she was attacked at school in the parking lot. So what happened?
It's not like, like a mafia boss or something attacked brutally in the park.
Exactly.
That's something you might expect, but Teacher of the Year is something that's quite unexpected. And then it makes you think,
That's true. I like to work with
going on?
contrast, actually. I like to have very different characters kind of come together.
So tell me about how you came up with this particular idea for the book and how you researched it. What's your process like for writing?
So I think the process has been a little bit different for both, for the two different books. But I do a lot of research, for sure. So a lot of the book is set in a small town library. So I went to the small town library where I grew up, and I asked a lot of questions. And also some of the character traits, I would sit down with people and ask them really kind of intimate, very like detailed questions. I spoke to the police, obviously. So I talked to as many people as possible. That's what I do love about being an author, is that you can be nosy and you can ask a lot of questions under the guise of being an author. And I think you do a lot of research, but what you need to be careful of is that you don't use all of your research. Because it's very easy to get bogged down into it. You do get distracted an awful lot from your writing, doing research. You find all sorts of interesting stuff that doesn't end up in your book. But you do want to make sure, sometimes you're tempted to include a lot because you want to show the reader that I know what I'm talking about. I've done the research. But you kind of have to stop yourself, because you have to only keep things in that are relevant to the story. So in my second book, I'm dealing with human trafficking, and I read so many accounts of women. I focused on the US because I used to live there. I read so many accounts, but at the end of the day, I had to read them all and then put them away and let it kind of, process it, and then sit down and write my own story.
Because you have to, that's the thing, because you're trying to create that realism.
Yes.
But at the same time, there has to be focus.
Exactly.
Bring it all back in.
That's correct, yeah. And I do like doing research. I really enjoy learning about things that I didn't know anything about or I have an interest in.
What are the kind of, the really surprising things while you were doing your research for these books where you just went, oh, I really didn't know that.
Well, I'll tell you, one of the things was with human trafficking. I think we assume it's people being moved from one country to another and they end up trapped in human trafficking. But I found this really sad stories of actually girls in the US who may be neglected by their family, or they just don't get on and they meet the wrong people, they make the wrong decisions, they kind of get lured in, because a lot of these people, human traffickers, they're obviously very manipulative and very clever in how they go about their business. And so it's really sad. And I felt I really wanted to shed some light on it because, the statistics that I read were pretty horrific. And so rather than kind of be a, campaign for it, I thought it'd be quite good to include it in a story that is hopefully entertaining. And kind of get the message across that way.
Exactly, because nobody wants to kind of be spoken at and
exactly
kind of be lectured.
Absolutely.
Well, you want to be drawn into a story.
Yes, absolutely. And you just can't, your reader is going to be clever at the end of the day. You don't want to talk down to them.
Yeah.
And you don't want to give them too much information either, because you want to let them work things out for themselves.
So talk to us about, in terms of getting the book published, and we think, I've written the story, write a few drafts, then it gets edited, and then it's done. Is that how it works?
It's a little bit like that. But I think you're so focused in your writing on getting published, you don't really think about what happens after.
Right.
So, so even after the competition, you don't necessarily have a deal with the agent or with the publisher. What you have is a meeting with the agent where you brainstorm your idea and so on. But he will really only take you on when you've finished the manuscript and he believes he can sell it. So, there's that sort of obstacle first that you got to get over. So, what you need to do is you celebrate every little achievement. So I would celebrate that, obviously. And then you then go on to the difficult process of publishers. And my first book, there's a woman in a coma, and we had the first one or two publishers, I think, came back and said, we've already purchased a book where a woman is in a coma, so we can't take this on. And you think, oh, okay, so it's not just about having a good story or having good writing, but it also has to fit in with their list. And
Their
luckily,
shopping list. It's a shopping list.
exactly.
It's like,
A little bit like that.
Ticked it off. The woman in the coma. That can't be yours. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So you kind of really have to just keep faith throughout the whole process and kind of visualize the end. And I'm a big visualizer, so I'm always trying to picture that it's happened. So once that has happened, then you get assigned an editor, and they read your work. They'll have comments, and you might change things according to that. And then you'll have a copy editor that will perhaps fact check and make sure things make sense. And then you'll have a proofreader. So you do go through it, and by the time the book hits the store, you have read the book yourself so many times that you can barely bear to look at it.
You're just like, I never want to see it again. Please buy the book.
Exactly. Yeah, you want to kind of just move on and write something else.
When we come back in just a moment, we are talking to Jessica Jarlvi all about how she's gotten her books published, and she's working on a completely different book now. We're going to be talking to her about that. But I want to ask you coming up, Jessica, about how being a published author has changed your life. What has it been like going to the festivals, going and talking to your readers and meeting them and their reactions to your book? That's all coming up on Life Beats on Pulse 95.
Life Beats. Life Beats with Sally Musa. Only on Pulse 95.
We are talking becoming a published author with Jessica Jarlvi. She's written 2 books now. When I Wake Up, a breathtaking, heart-pounding and dark debut of a crime novel. And her second book is What Did I Do? So really, really interesting discussion here with you, Jessica. But I want to ask you, you talked about the process of getting published and how difficult that can be, and making sure that rather than being discouraged by the rejections, you just keep plowing on and use them as fuel.
Absolutely, you have to.
Yeah.
Persistence is key.
It's key. But then when you get published, what comes after that? Because you really have to be promoting your book all the time. Talk to us about that, and then meeting your fans who have finally, read your book, the book that you've been working on for so long.
Yes. No, as I said before, I think you're just so focused on getting published that you don't think about what comes after. But then you have to promote the book, which is lovely in so many ways. But it takes time away from you writing your next book, and especially if you've got a contract for the next one, it can be a bit stressful. But even I think people assume if you're self-published, you have to do a lot of promotional stuff yourself. But if you have a publisher behind you, you don't. But you still do, because you have to put genuine content out there. It really needs to come from you. So you do need to put some effort into that. And it is kind of expected. But meeting people at festivals and book signings is incredible. You kind of been sitting there on your own, plowing away, writing in your own little world. And it's just lovely to be out there and people are reading your work and they have comments and thoughts on it. But also you meet so many aspiring writers. And it is really important to me to try and inspire them to keep going with their dreams, because that was me once upon a time. I remember, being at a festival and one of the key moments for me was meeting Margaret Atwood, and she signed in my book, good luck with your writing, and Lionel Shriver, the same thing. They all gave me advice when they were signing my books, and I really appreciated that, and it kept me going. And I would like to kind of give back and try and inspire others to keep going. It doesn't have to be that you want to write books, but any dream really that you have, if you keep persisting, it does pay off eventually.
It really is a key moment, isn't it, when you meet your idols, if you like, the people that you've been following for so long. I saw a great tweet once, and I can't remember who it was from. Somebody who wrote that being a writer is like telling a joke and then waiting a year or two to find out if it was funny.
Yes, that is very true. It's kind of a slow process. You finish your novel and it takes a while, obviously, before it hits the shelves, and you're busy then writing your next one, and your kind of mind is engrossed in that.
And so tell us about that pressure then. You were talking about the pressure of the second book.
Yes.
When you have, you've put your first book out, you don't have any precedent. So you're like, whatever I get is going to be fantastic and I'm excited about it. But then the second book comes out and you're like, well, it has to be as good or top it. So
yes, exactly. And also suddenly you have time pressure. So with the first book, you really have as much time as you need. I did feel some pressure because I had won the competition. I obviously wanted to submit it while he still remembered me. You know, I didn't want to wait too long. And it was also very motivating to know somebody would read it. But with the second book, there was suddenly a deadline. I happened to be pregnant and I was still working in my marketing job. And it was just a lot going on, and trying to carve out time for that while I was then promoting the first book. It was quite stressful. And I just had to sometimes just go off and sit in a cafe and plug music into my ears and just really just focus on getting work done. But at the same time, it's amazing how much you can accomplish in a short amount of time when you have to.
Yeah. I mean, you know, that deadline that focuses the mind.
Yes.
Just really gets you working, doesn't it? But how do you do that day to day when, you know, it can be so easy to kind of go, well, I've just got writer's block today and I can't do it. Or, you know, how do you motivate yourself to write, to get in there and to write your best stuff?
So I don't necessarily believe in writer's block. I feel like I can't afford to have writer's block. And I feel like sometimes it's a form of procrastination. Because even if you're a bit stuck, there are always other ways. You can start somewhere else in the story. You can write a dialogue. You can always write something, even if you end up not using it. So I think there's always something that you could put down on paper to keep going. And that's all you have to do, really, is write. I think a lot of writers say that the process is very painful. I listened to Jeff Kinney, the author of Wimpy Kid, and he said that he doesn't actually really enjoy writing or drawing his stories, but he really likes a sense of accomplishment at the end. And I can absolutely relate to that. Although I do enjoy the writing process, it can be painful.
Yeah.
Because you're rewriting so much. I cut out 30,000 words from my second novel when I'd finished it because I just wasn't happy with a lot of parts that I didn't feel added to the story. And that is painful, but also necessary.
The editing is just as important as the actual writing part.
Absolutely. And the thing is, you do a lot of the editing yourself before you even show it to your editor.
How do you become a good editor?
I think you read other people's work. And that doesn't necessarily mean that you just read best-selling books. You also need to read books that perhaps you don't think are that great. And being on writing courses, for example, or being in a writing group where you read each other's work, you can very easily pick up with somebody else's work what really works, what doesn't work. And I love being part of communities like that because the same thing with me, I get so focused on my own story, it's so clear in my head, but perhaps when I put it on paper, it's not so clear to the reader. So to have an objective reader say to me, actually, I can't really visualize this or really picture this. And then it's like, okay, that's good to know. And then I can change it. So I think it is important with feedback.
And then you can kind of get inspired by others as well who are maybe writing something completely different. And just
absolutely.
Because it can be so lonely, right? You are in your own head.
Yes.
You're writing your story, but actually kind of getting yourself out into the world and with other maybe experiences that look like they have nothing to do with what you're writing, but actually can inspire something else.
Yes, absolutely. I think so. It's going to the movies or going to an art exhibition or going to the theatre. Everything inspires you. Listening to other writers, I find inspiring. I still go on writing courses. Somebody said to me, why would you do a writing course? You publish, but you're always evolving. You're always learning. And everybody has a different process. You can always pick up something new.
Yeah, exactly. And the readers want something new from you as well, don't they? Is there an expectation?
I felt with the second book there was an expectation to do something perhaps similar. And I think that I wanted to perhaps do it a little bit darker and deeper. But yes, I think there definitely is an expectation for an author to keep producing similar work. I think because the publishers are obviously thinking that, buyers bought this book, they enjoyed it, we want to be able to sell something similar. So I think for me, I've decided to write something completely different before I go back to writing in this genre. And I will, because I really do enjoy it. But sometimes you need to challenge yourself a little bit as well to develop.
We are going to come back in just a moment and talk about what Jessica is working on now, because it is something completely different, and talk about how do you do that? How do you kind of juggle writing with motherhood? And if somebody's an aspiring writer, what would be your advice for them? So much great conversation still to come with the fabulous Jessica Jarlvi.
Life Beats with Sally Musa, only on Pulse 95.
We're chatting with author Jessica Jarlvi all about her writing career. After winning a writing prize, she launched her writing career with When I Wake Up and What Did I Do? So first, a crime novel, and her second is all about human trafficking, a psychological suspense thriller as well. Just amazing stuff. But what you're working on now, Jessica, is completely different.
Exactly. So I have 4 children. I felt I wanted to write something that they could read. And so I'm currently working on an adventure story set in Sweden about Vikings, which I'm really fascinated by. And so I'm only about halfway through, and I'm sort of testing it on my kids, which
that sounds so cool.
Yeah, well, yeah. No, I hope so. It's completely new for me, but that's also part of challenging yourself and trying something, and doing something different.
So you were inspired by by having kids to kind of go, let me just see, what this will be like. Is it a completely different process writing a children's book?
It is, yeah. So you have to, obviously it's not as dark, and also, just the characters are obviously younger, but you can also have a lot of fun with it because the banter between the kids, I'm having a lot of fun with that. It's a completely new process for me, but at the same, it's the same in terms of being disciplined and sitting down and doing it.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously the poetic license is a lot bigger with this, that you can just make up whatever you want. Really?
Yes, yeah, exactly. Although I'm doing a lot of research about the Vikings to kind of try and keep that as authentic as possible.
That is really cool. Okay, so what do we not know about the Vikings that we might discover in this book of yours?
Well, one of the things that I recently discovered is that we all think that they had swords and helmets, but apparently that was extremely expensive.
Really?
And so a sword would cost the same as a whole house and all the animals and so on that belong to the house. So it wasn't actually as common as we think. So I kind of had to make one of my characters have a wooden sword because it just wouldn't be realistic that he has a real sword.
Really?
So
that is so interesting.
Yes, exactly.
When they have, movies about Vikings or whatever it is, or Vikings, the actual series.
Yes.
Everybody's just wearing those helmets and going off with the swords.
I know. No, that's very interesting. And so I've actually met this woman who spends a lot of her time as a Viking, and she's so inspiring, and she's really helping me with my research, and I'm so incredibly grateful for that. When people help you out along the way with information, it's just such a blessing.
Hold up. She spends her time currently as a Viking.
So obviously she doesn't spend all of her time. She has a regular job, but she spends a lot of time in this Viking village in the south of Sweden.
Wow.
Where people, especially in the summer, not at the moment because it's too cold, but in the summer months they have this Viking village that they're trying to keep as authentic as possible. And so I'm absolutely going to go there this summer, and I can't wait to see her Viking wardrobe, which she has told me is actually bigger than her regular wardrobe. So I'm really, really, really excited about that.
That's incredible.
Yes.
I mean, what kind of traditions and things do they kind of keep up, now in the present day? Viking traditions.
That's what I'm hoping to find out when I go.
You got to tell us when you come back.
I will come back and tell you.
Something that we talked about is, when you meet your fans, and something that you're doing as part of, the festival circuit is school tours. And we're so excited you've come to Sharjah for a school visit.
That's right. I was here last week. Yes. And I think that's also what's inspiring me to write something for children, because that is such a pleasure to meet young readers. And obviously, not all kids love to read, but I'm hoping that after having met an author, and we talked about character development and dialogue, and using dialogue to kind of get a story to come alive, and everybody in the room created a character and started to think about the traits that the character had, the strengths, the weaknesses, how they would speak, and then their characters would have a dialogue with each other. And it was just some amazing work, and I find it so incredibly inspiring that I would love to do a children's book so that I can do more school visits and talk about writing even more authentically, having written for that age group.
Do you read out loud to your kids?
I do, especially with the younger ones. I do. No, yes,
I just
absolutely.
remember that. And when they love a story, they want you to read it over and over.
I know.
And over
that
again.
is the only thing. You get a bit bored because you're reading the same story over and over again, and you know it by heart.
But you can see the difference it makes in them.
Oh, absolutely. And it's even more fun when they're a little bit older, and you can read chapter books, and you can perhaps do one chapter every night.
Your eldest, Julia, She's quite a supporter of yours. Shout out to Julia.
Yes, no, she is. She is my biggest fan and my biggest critic.
I love that.
Which is a great combination.
Do your kids look at you and think, wow, look at mom, she's a published author. I'd love to do that. Have you inspired something in them as well?
Yes, absolutely. So they can't read my books yet because I don't think they're old enough. But absolutely, and I think that's why I want to write something for them. But funnily enough, I'll tell you a story. So my daughter, who's 15, she loves to read. She loves to write. She's always writing stories. But my 12-year-old son, we really struggled to get him to read. He loves his iPad. He loves his computer. And I felt he was becoming increasingly obsessed with it. And so we took it away for 3 months. So we took the iPad away for 3 months. He was upset with us for about half a day. And after that, he didn't even ask for it. And he started reading. So he has read, I think, 20 books at least in that time. And now we cannot get him to stop reading. We bought him a Kindle for Christmas and he is constantly reading.
What does he love to read?
Anything. So it could be about magic, it could be fantasy, it could be adventure, like literally anything. And I would take him into a bookshop before and I'd say, just pick one book that you're even vaguely interested in, please. And he would say, no, I can't find anything.
You'd practically have to beg him to buy a book.
I know, but he was so bored not having his iPad that and the funny thing is now 3 months later, he forgot the password to his iPad. So he locked himself out. So we're probably going to have to reset it. But we haven't still because he is actually just not asking for it. And he is just loving reading. It's incredible.
Do you think that's what we need right now? We need to get kids bored again so that they'll come back to reading?
Actually, you know what? I think a lot of people gave us a hard time saying, electronics and it's the future, you can't take it away from them. Of course, he uses computer for schoolwork, but we're taking all the games off. And but you know what? So I think sometimes you need a break because I think what we struggle with sometimes is helping our kids to handle it responsibly. It's one thing to give them an iPad, but how do you have to set limits. You wouldn't just give them anything and say, I wouldn't give them the keys to my car and say, learn how to drive on your own.
Right.
So, you have to kind of be involved in that process and teach them because it's new to us as parents because we didn't grow up with it. So yes, perhaps it was harsh, but it's definitely paid off. And he's just so much more pleasant to hang out with as well.
That's just brilliant. And obviously that just expands your mind endlessly.
It does, absolutely.
More than we can talk about.
Yes.
But just in the last couple of minutes that we have, Jessica, your advice to aspiring writers.
Yes. So I would just say to write. Just write as much as possible. Whatever it is, just write. Carry a notebook and write. And then when you feel comfortable with it, you start sharing your work. Because that is really, it was a very important step for me, was showing my work to other people to get feedback. It's super scary the first time. But once you've done it once, then it doesn't even face you anymore. So get feedback from others, join writing groups, do writing courses. Just get out there and listen to authors, read as many books as you can. And then start pitching your work. Because if you don't pitch your work, then nobody's going to take it on. Don't keep it in a drawer.
What makes for a really great story?
I think you do have to have a good beginning. You do have to bring the reader in. There are so many books in bookshops and there is competition in that sense. So you need to have a good opening and having lots of good cliffhangers always keeps the reader turning the page. But I don't necessarily think that you have to have a super original story. I think it's your take on a story, really, because we could both sit down and write a book. We're given the same plot. We would write 2 completely different books. So I think, don't try and be too clever necessarily. Just sit down and follow your heart. What is a story that you absolutely want to tell people? What do you have to say? And go with that.
Really great advice. The fantastic Jessica Jarlvi. We're so excited to see what's to come from you. Hopefully we'll see you at the Sharjah Book Fair as well.
I'd love to be there.
That would be fantastic. Thank you so much.
Life Beats with Sally Musa. Only on Pulse 95.